Today I am going to be talking about my journey into a nudist lifestyle. So I get a lot of people asking, like, how did you get into a nudist lifestyle? So I am here today to share my individual story with you all. So I am going to rewind back to when I was about 19, 20 years old, and I had a pretty big obsession with tanning, like a lot of my other female friends. Tanning was quite popular back then, and a lot of the time we would sunbake topless merely because we wanted to avoid tan lines. So it was quite a superficial thing at this time in my youth. And I grew up in a town called Geelong in the state of Victoria here in Australia, and we have the surf coast. And so we were frequenting a lot of the surf beaches, or the textile beaches as us nudies call them, which is basically the opposite to a nude beach. So we would frequent a lot of those beaches, and a lot of the time when we were sunbaking topless, it would just draw a lot of unwanted attention, and a lot of attention that I felt quite uncomfortable with. So we started sort of venturing down toward the more secluded and isolated parts of the beaches where it was a lot more quiet. But you would still get people, you know, walking past you, giving you looks or gawking, and just making, you know, it ultimately made me feel really uncomfortable. And a lot of the time I would feel really objectified and quite sexualized. And that was, you know, as a younger sort of female back then, there was like sort of this like energy I felt at these surf beaches, these textile beaches, where speaking as a female, I felt there was a lot of sort of comparison and like this competitive sort of nature at beaches, as a, you know, as to like who looked best in their bikini. And I just didn't like that sort of, I didn't like that vibe. So anyway, so 2013, I went to Europe for the first time, and I visited some beaches in Spain where like topless sunbaking or nude sunbaking was like more normal than not. And I was made to feel really comfortable at these beaches. I loved the freedom and the liberation, and, you know, this not feeling like I was constantly being gawked at, or, you know, feeling like out of place. And then towards the end of 2013, when I was back in Australia, we have this nude beach on the surf coast down in Victoria called Point Addis. And I just said to one of my girlfriends, I was like, why don't we just, like, you know, head to Point Addis and see what it's like? So we ended up venturing to Point Addis, which was my first time going to a nude beach here in Australia. And at that stage, I was still just going topless, so I wasn't going completely nude. And we got down there and we had this skimboard, and we were along like the shoreline, and my best friend was like trying to pull me along on this skimboard, and she was just struggling. And then this gentleman who was at the nude beach approached us and just offered his assistance. And so I was like, yeah, why not? Like he was super friendly, really polite, very respectful. And I just remember like sitting on this skimboard, and I looked up in front of me, and we took off, and all I can see was this man's ass and his balls and his penis just like flying around, and my best friend's butt just jiggling up and down. And I just had like a really good laugh to myself. It was so lighthearted, and, you know, we thanked the gentleman, and he was just so friendly and welcoming, and it was just such a refreshing interaction to have had. You know, like he was, I would say he was probably middle-aged, and here he was interacting with two younger females who were completely topless, and I didn't feel like one bit objectified. I didn't feel sexualized at all, and if anything, he was super respectful. And that interaction was a very pivotal part in my nudist journey, because, you know, it reminded me that, you know, nudity isn't necessarily a sexual thing. And so from that point on, I decided to stick to Point Addis, albeit just topless at this point. And then there was one day, probably about, I think it was like a month or two later, and it was a quieter day at the beach in summer. And I just thought, I'm gonna take my underwear off. I'm just gonna see what it's like. And so I took my underwear off, and I remember, you know, there were a few moments of like anxiety and just feeling quite nervous and feeling just like quite sort of like self-conscious about it. And then I ran into the water, and it was such a liberating and empowering feeling. And I just remember, like, within a matter of minutes, it just felt completely normal. And I looked around, I was like, everyone else is completely nude. Like, and I didn't feel that people were judging me. And I realized that it was all within my own head. You know, having grown up Catholic, with quite a religious mum, I felt a lot of shame around, you know, I suppose being completely nude. Like, I thought going topless was acceptable, but I was like, you know, I always thought to myself, I'm never going to take my underwear off, because somehow, you know, it was more sacred if I kept my underwear on. And it took me up until that point to really get over that and to realize that my body is just as sacred when it's completely nude, whether it's in private or in public, as it is when it's completely clothed, private or public. And it was like, just like this whole sort of this belief system that I shed as soon as I took that underwear off. And from that point on, I, you know, never kept my underwear on at the nude beach again. And I continued to go completely nude. And yeah, so, I mean, it really shifted my perception. Starting to frequent this nude beach really shifted my perception about nudity. And I really began to appreciate that there are a lot of people out there that have made the discernment or the differentiation between sex and nudity, and that there are a community of people that can appreciate non-sexual nudity. And I was probably usually one of the younger sort of females at the beach, and to not feel sexualized was a really refreshing thing, because at that stage of my life, I felt that, you know, I was sexualized a lot, or I was objectified a lot. And so that was a really, really welcome and refreshing thing to have in my life. And so 2015, I went on a 7-month solo backpacking trip, and I was in Europe for most of the time, and I ended up visiting a fair few nude beaches whilst in Europe, completely nude, and I loved it. If anything, when I was on that backpacking trip, I was like hunting down nude beaches as much as I could. And then towards the end of that trip, in September 2015, I remember just like being in Croatia and on a backpacker's budget, and I started running out of money, but I was like, I'm not ready to go home. Like, I don't want to go home yet. So I'd met a lot of backpackers that had done woofing, where it's like a work away type thing, where you volunteer your time at usually organic farms, in exchange for accommodation and food. And so I thought, yep, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try and, you know, lengthen my stay as much as I can and start volunteering at places. And so I applied for a few different things, and I remember applying for what I thought was a eco clothing company in Croatia. And so I ended up getting an email back from them saying, yep, we'll take you on board. And as I read through the email, I was like, oh, it's an eco clothing optional campsite in Montenegro. And I looked at it and I was like, hell yes. I was like super spontaneous on that trip. So I welcomed it with open arms. I was so excited. So I headed to Montenegro, ended up finding this amazing place in the mountains. And I remember knocking on the gate, having no idea what to expect. And the owner of, it's called Camp Full Monty in Montenegro. So one of the owners, Steve, answered the gate, and he was completely nude. And I do remember being taken aback a little bit, because I suppose it was my first time interacting with someone who was naked outside of a nude beach, who I didn't know. And so I just remember just being a little bit taken aback, and then he welcomed me in, was really friendly, really polite. And within a matter of minutes, I felt so comfortable, so at ease. I met his wife as well, Daisy, and Denise, their dog's name's Daisy, Denise. And they were just such a lovely couple and so welcoming, and made me feel so comfortable. And if anything, I just couldn't wait to get my clothes off. And this experience was like, this was my first time, I suppose, really experiencing social nudity, where I was interacting and engaging with people whilst we were all completely nude, doing like your everyday things like cooking, cleaning, and all that kind of stuff, but completely nude. And it just felt really second nature to me, and it was such a beautiful way of being, and I took to it straight away. I remember I mowed the campsite. I do remember I put some shoes on, and I did put underwear on because I did end up getting my period whilst I was there. But you know, I felt so comfortable, like, and yeah, I got this taste for like at this clothing optional campsite, and I was like, I can't wait to like visit more nudist places. And so I ended up returning to Australia a few months later, and at the very beginning of 2016, I visited my first nudist resort here in Australia in Noosa, and it was actually this experience and stay that really inspired and kickstarted what we now know as the Nude Blogger. I'm going to save that particular story for another video, but yeah, and since then, you know, I have become a naked yoga instructor. I have a blog where my mission is to really normalize non-sexual nudity and to promote body positivity and advocate for self-acceptance and body positivity, and, you know, remove the stigma around a nudist lifestyle, because there is a lot of stigma and stereotyping around the lifestyle, and a lot of misunderstanding and misconception and judgment. And I feel like, you know, I'm a pretty good candidate to sort of break that stereotype and to really help shed light on the lifestyle and non-sexual nudity. So that's really basically my journey. As you can see, I didn't grow up in some like hippie family. Nudity was really quite taboo in my household, given, you know, we grew up Catholic, and it just wasn't, you know, I didn't walk around naked freely at home. There was like you know, I felt embarrassed to do that. So I do like to highlight that point because I feel like a lot of people can relate to that. And I have come from a background where, you know, I grew up in a more conservative sort of family in that regard. So it's been a really big journey for me, and there's been a lot of, you know, a lot of self-discovery, just about my own belief patterns, about my own conditioning and programming around my body and nudity, and, you know, just really understanding how much shame that society will place on nudity and the naked body. So yeah, I hope that this story can like at least inspire you to want to discover it for yourself or learn more about it, and, you know, help shift your perception in a way that helps to foster more self-acceptance within yourself, and more tolerance, I suppose. And you know, getting involved in social nudity I feel is so beneficial for body image. And a lot of people, especially with social media these days, struggle with body image issues. And what social nudity does is it exposes us to a diversity of real bodies, not just things we see in the movies and Hollywood and the media and all these like airbrushed, perfect, ideal sort of bodies that we believe are the standard that we should adhere to. And it's really beautiful to be able to see people of all different shapes and sizes and ages and ethnicities, people from all different professions being able to just shed the layers and embrace a sense of vulnerability, and just be able to have, you know, this really beautiful sense of self-acceptance. So yeah, that's really my story with it all. And for people wanting to get more involved in social nudity or to become more comfortable, you know, in their bodies, I always recommend getting comfortable with your own nudity first. Unless you're the sort of person that just likes to like dive in head first, right in the deep end, you know, you can always head to a nude beach or a reputable resort or an event. Otherwise, I always recommend getting comfortable with your own nudity first. But that's my story, and I love that I've been able to share that with you all, and hopefully that's given you some insight. And yeah, I look forward to sharing my story on how I started the Nude Blogger, like how it all came about. So you can look forward to that video soon. But in the meantime, take care, and I hope you're all doing well during these times, and I am sending you all so much love.